so that, okay, perhaps the key bit, and I come to this last of the three bits here, because actually, as I say, it's only about 20% of it. You've got to have a pension. I don't know if I mentioned that. Automatic enrollment, you're assessing your workers, your employees, and you're putting them into a qualifying workplace pension. What on earth is a qualifying workplace pension scheme? Well, these days it's a bit more complicated than it perhaps once was. Over the years, we've had various different pieces of legislation which has changed pensions and the way they work. I've already mentioned final salary schemes, occupational pension schemes, money purchase, all these different names out there. The most common these days would be what we would refer to as a GPP, or a group personal pension. This is essentially just a collection of lots of individual pension arrangements that is housed under one name as you as the employer. We also have, however, a master trust. Has anybody heard of master trust before? Is that a phrase that you're familiar with? Nope. Okay. When this legislation was introduced, the government basically incepted their own version of a master trust known as Nest. You might have heard of that, seen it if you've done any research on auto-enrolment. Nest is the provider, or I certainly call them, the provider of last resort. So if you're struggling to get a pension anywhere, you can always go to Nest. Nest was set up by the government as a pension provider that will accept, not can, but will accept every single employee, regardless of their workforce. And they work on a master trust basis. So a master trust is really run for the individuals rather than run like an insurance company where it's run for profit. Of course, there's restrictions and benefits of being in either one, but there's lots of good ones out there as well. Names you may have heard of or be familiar with is Now Pensions, or the People's Pension. One of my favorites being the People's Pension. Again, just to caveat that's not a recommendation. I obviously haven't been through your personal details, but again, I've got to sign paperwork for everything these days. People's Pension, very, very good. They tend to do paper-based communication, for example. Their systems, not only are we looking at, is it a good pension, but what kind of systems do they offer you? Because I've already said, regardless of how you run payroll, you're going to have an output. That output is individual, address, how much you pay them, how old they are, etc. That's got to be sent somewhere. Well, how do you send it? Well, generally that's by a CSV file or Excel file off to a pension provider. If their system is an absolute clunky nightmare, then it's going to cost you time. And if you're not familiar with pensions and pension language, if there's a problem, then how do you know how to fix it without having the support in the background there? Well, it's going to become very, very difficult. So you want a simple system as well as just a good pension. And when we talk about good pensions, so now we're also talking about the investment funds. A qualifying workplace pension scheme, you need a series of defaults. That is a default minimum contribution level that you're setting for your business as a start. So auto-enrolment introduces contributions as an obligation for you as an employer. So previously, you didn't need to, as a business, you didn't need to offer a pension. Stakeholder came along. As long as you've got at least 5 employees, you should offer a pension, but again, no minimum contribution level. Automatic enrollment's been introduced, and now we're talking about a minimum contribution level that's starting at 2%. Okay? There's various different definitions of pensionable pay, so what constitutes pensionable pay, whether that's bonus, overtime, basic pay, total pay, all these different things that we can play about with. But ignoring all of the complex definitions of pensionable pay, in its most simplest form, we're looking at a 2% contribution. At the moment, that's 1% from you as a minimum as a business. If you want to pay 2, fantastic, then theoretically your employees wouldn't have to pay anything. But minimum from you as a business is 1, which then of course leaves 1 to the individual to pay. So you need that to be defaulted, that needs to be in place, so as soon as you're automatically enrolling somebody, you're paying 1% and you're taking 1% from their pay as well. So again, why the communications are very important, because that's 1% that they will miss. 50p, I've had employees phone me up about the tiniest of amounts before. You start playing with people's money and people start to get angsty. Does it stay there though? Does it stay at 2%? No, it doesn't. In October 2017, the contribution levels will be going up. So the contribution levels in October 2017 will be 5%. That's 2% of which from you as a minimum as the employer. Okay, so again, potentially leaving the employees to pay 3 there. And does it stay there? Oh, no. October 2018, so a year later, this is when it reaches its peak, and we're looking at an 8% contribution in total. Okay, so that's 3% from you as a minimum as an employer, leaving 5% for the employees to make up. So right now, if you employ somebody and you pay them enough and you've automatically enrolled them, 1% is probably not the biggest ask in the world. But as you can see, as time goes by, if you're not communicating and keeping on top of this, those contributions start to increase and employees are going to start to have more and more questions, because 1%, yeah, okay, 1%, not that I've got tons of money to throw around, but 1% probably wouldn't miss it. 3%, okay, now I'm probably going to start to see that. 5% as an employee, okay, now I'm really going to start to see this coming off my monthly pay, and of course that's going to have effect on everything else, on living standards, etc. So again, I imagine it's not now that your employee is going to start to come to you with the complex questions. It's going to be when we're starting to talk about bigger contributions. You don't have to pay the minimum. They are the minimum, of course. You can set your levels at whatever you want, really, as long as you're meeting the minimum. So if you want to set up a scheme that's, say, 5 and 5, absolutely fine for you to do that. 10 and 10 if you're really feeling generous. Again, you can set the contribution levels at whatever you want. The minimum is just the minimum. So if you paid the 1 and 1, for example, and you only wanted to pay the 1, if your employee wanted to pay more, certainly they can go ahead and do that. If you wanted to pay more, fantastic, model employer, of course, more than happy for you to be able to do that. But yes, so certainly from a budgeting point of view, and coming back to the pension here, so the pension, to be qualifying, you have to at least meet that minimum. 12 to 18 months, if you do nothing, including deciding what pension you're going to use, perhaps it's worth just factoring in what contributions you're going to have to pay. So if you were thinking, I don't know, about giving somebody a pay rise, keep a little bit of that back, just in case, because you know you're going to have this cost to bear in the future. Back to the pension providers then. So as I say, at the moment, really, we've got two players in the market. So we've got your traditional insurance companies, pension providers, your Avivas, your Agons, your Standard Life, Scottish Life, all these big players in the market. Generally will be offering some form of GPP, a group personal pension scheme. And then you've got the master trust providers. Some of them new, some of them been around for a long time, just by other names. So again, People's Pension, Nest, which is obliged to accept you as an employer. So if you have nothing else, you can go there. And Now Pensions. Why is Nest obliged to take everybody and anybody? Because it was set up by the government. But other than that, it's because we could be in a situation where your only option could be Nest. Auto-enrolment, as I say, is the obligation of every single employer in the UK to do something about this. I've already said that next year we've got over 500,000 businesses hitting their staging dates. So you can imagine the pension providers are sitting back and going, whoa, this is a lot of work, and we can afford to cherry pick because they're not duty bound to take everybody. So when you're looking to the market for a pension provider, it's not just what pension provider would I like to be with, but now it's also what pension provider would like to take my business. So there's lots of different influencing factors there that affects what pension provider you can go with. A good example is recently I've been dealing with a hotel group. Massive scheme. We're talking 4,000 employees. Massive, massive scheme. And they were with one of the big pension providers, obviously, traditionally. These are the guys that would look after that type of arrangement. But they've come along and said, well, if you want to use this for auto-enrolment, they're going to levy something referred to as an employer admin charge or an employer fee on a monthly basis, just to be able to use the scheme, regardless of the fact the contributions are substantial, because we've got quite a lot going through. It's the work in the background. With the hotel industry, you end up with quite a transient workforce. So we might have situations where we've got these guys with £10, £15 where they've not opted out, just sitting in that account, £10, £15, and you imagine this over a few hundred of these accounts. For an auto-enrolment scheme to be qualifying, again, to be a qualifying workplace pension scheme, you also have to meet a maximum. You can't go above the maximum annual management charge, which is currently 0.75%. Traditionally, pensions might have charged you considerably more than that. Now, for a pension to be applicable and the fund to be applicable for auto-enrolment, 0.75 is the cap. So you can imagine 0.75 on £10 for a few hundred people. That's not a lot of money. In fact, to send out the annual statement in the post probably costs more than that. So for these pension providers, really don't want that. So they just simply either won't offer the scheme or levy what I've already mentioned there. So that's the employer or admin fee or an employer charge. They package it up in different ways, but basically it's you're going to have to pay X amount per month. So if you are doing this yourself and you're looking about and thinking, what pension provider should I use? Go to them, ask them for terms, of course, but you will probably find that some of them will come back and levy this charge. Nest is being quite canny, if I can put it like that. Nest was set up by the government, as I say. They have a fixed annual management charge, which is 0.3. There's also currently a charge applying, not to you as a business, but to the employees. They can get away with it. They were set up by the government, unlike everybody else, of 1.8% every time you make contributions into it. So for your employees, it's not always the best scheme. You may be able to get better terms elsewhere. People's Pension, for example, they tend to offer a 0.5% annual management charge as standard across the board, but you're limited on the different investment funds that are available. And obviously the big guys, their annual management charges can variable depending on how much they want your business. So if that's not enough, default fund. You've got default contributions. Where are these contributions going to go? Where are you going to pay this money to? Well, you need a default fund that's appropriate for your staff. So a default fund is if you go to the bank, you pay money in the bank, it will sit there and it might earn a very paltry amount of interest. If you just paid your money into the bank and thought that's going to do as a pension, you can imagine, let's say your retirement is 30 years off, you're 20-odd years old, your retirement's 30 years off. Inflation over 30 years, if you put £10 in there today, and it's earning not a lot of a percentage rate every year, 30 years' time, inflation is just going to erode it. That'll be worth absolutely nothing. So with pensions, what we tend to do in the background is have some form of investment fund, certainly for younger individuals, the makeup of which will include stocks and shares, these types of things. You need to have a default fund that's appropriate for your staff, so whatever fund that is that you pick, where this money is going to be paid into automatically. So you as an employer almost has to become a financial advisor as well and pick a fund as a default. Or, of course, you can outsource it.
Somebody, you gave an example earlier, somebody who works at another job,
Yep.
maybe that's kind of their part-time job or main job, and they have a pension possibly with them. Could an employer of that person just pay into that fund, in a sense, contribute to the same pension fund that's already been set up?
Unlikely, but theoretically possible. So, for example, some of the master trusts, just the way that they're set up, because it's a trust arrangement rather than being individual contracts, then that is entirely possible through the People's Pension or Nest. It tends to be one account for one individual, but generally speaking, no, it's unlikely to happen. Also, that would mean communication between you and their employer, whoever that other employer may be. So, of course, what the regulator in this situation is trying to do is just say, look at everything in isolation. So they don't want you to have to. Yes, theoretically you could, but it's very rare that would be a possibility.
For the employee, if they had a pension scheme somewhere else, could they say to their employer, can you not go with my current pension provider and set up a different scheme?
Yep. Theoretically, yes. This is something I find very common as well. I go into a lot of businesses where perhaps traditionally they haven't had a workplace pension of sorts. They've just said to employees, we will make a pension contribution of X. You find yourself a pension scheme and we'll pay it into it. Alternatively, what we've also seen is maybe directors have their own SIPs, self-invested pensions, very fancy. They can play about with commercial property and lease it back to each other and make lots of... Anyway, so they've got their own individual arrangements, which are all lovely and very flowery. But for automatic enrolment, for you to meet your obligations as an employer, you need to be paying towards a qualifying workplace pension scheme. Part of that, again, is meeting the contributions and having an applicable default fund. If you wanted to, theoretically, you could go to every single person's individual arrangement and put in place some form of contract with that pension provider, which they'll be very reluctant to do, I imagine, for the contributions they'll be getting for it, to set in place these set minimums. But generally, that's just not the case. Because, for example, if it's just the one-on-one, you're paying your one across, the employee, because it's their arrangement, could theoretically stop their contributions at any point. That contract belongs to them, so there's no obligation on the pension provider to tell you as a business. If they did that, that's no longer qualifying. So you could go so long down the road before you realize actually you haven't been paying to a qualifying workplace pension. So for most businesses, and I say most, it's best to put in place something which is a brand new coverall just for everybody. If you have a pension in place at the moment, yes, of course. If you already offer a pension, theoretically that could be used for auto-enrolment, but my advice would be to have a chat with the pension provider first and don't just assume, because again, we're not just looking at how it's been in the past where they can charge what they want to the employees and it was all very straightforward. Now auto-enrolment makes it a little bit more complex for them because they're having to adhere to very strict rules, including this charge cap, which of course means that their ability is limited for them to make profit, which is ultimately what they're there to do. You know, they're not run as charitable organisations, they are there to make a profit. So just because they liked you in the past doesn't necessarily that they'll like you for automatic enrolment. And I've certainly found that, as I say, that was one example there, which was the hotel groups. You know, this is a big, as I say, big scheme. 4,000 employees is a big scheme, and they just don't want the business.
A lot of us in the room are only employees.
Groups like the SDS Forum are good. They do two things. They enable people with similar life experiences to come together and share their experience and realise that they're not alone and learn good ways to do things and better ways to do things. They're also good for advocating for people in that position. They can create a common voice that says, this is our experience as a carer, this is our experience as a parent, this is what we need, this is